Parijat, welcome to the Scenic Route podcast. How are you?
Hi, Jennifer. I'm doing well. I'm so excited to be here chatting with you today. I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you. Me too. Although we have a heavy topic for some.
Yeah.
Today we're going to talk about our relationship with loss. And the loss is so manifold, right? It could be the loss of our dreams, of our hopes, of a loved one, of someone who isn't physically in this world yet, and just what that does to us and how we can recover. And going into this conversation, I feel I really want to say that there is no competition in loss. If you feel deep grief and loss for something that is no longer here in whatever shape or form you desire it to be, that is valid. It's no competition. All loss, there is enough room for everyone to grieve their loss on their own terms, right?
Yes.
I see you
Yes.
nodding. Everyone who's
Yes.
watching is
I'm just so appreciative that you started with that because I think there is so much comparison. Is my
Mm,
loss justified for me to be able to express it
mhm.
to you, to others, to myself, publicly, privately? There's so much comparison. And I just really appreciate that you started with that. There is room. There's room for all of us.
It's so interesting, right? That we always go into this comparison, and it doesn't it, sometimes we always hear about like social media of like, oh, I'm like comparing myself to that girl over there with like the shiny hair and the what, but we also do it with shitty things where that we actually don't want, and we
Yeah.
still fall into this comparison thing. It's really interesting. Yeah, it's really all loss is equal. And but also we're not just comparing like our loss to someone else's. I i did this weird thing. I still sometimes mourn my healthy body that no longer is,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting. I sometimes also ask myself the question, oh, like, is it even like allowed to
Yes.
still
Yes.
grieve after years? Is there
Yes.
like an acceptable limit for grief, or
Yes.
how long can I bother someone with my grief? What's your take on this, Parijat?
I mean, yes, I think that is a totally valid loss that I think so many people can relate to. The loss of my healthy body, the loss of my health, that is a very valid loss. I think so many people can relate to that. And I think, as you were talking, it just kept coming to mind of who's putting that limit? Like, why do we have this internalized belief, because I think we all do to some degree, that there is an acceptable amount of time during which
Mm.
I am allowed to talk about this and it'll be okay. And then, and I think that time varies probably by family, by community, by culture. But at some point, there's an end point. And it always
Yes.
makes me wonder,
Otherwise, become the weird one.
right? Like, oh, you're still not over it. Oh, you're
Yeah,
still
the stuck
stuck
in time
there.
one. Or
Exactly. And I think what that speaks to more than anything else is our collective inability to
mm.
tolerate grief.
So we have a non-culture of grief.
Yeah, almost. Yeah, I think
Mm.
so. I think I can certainly speak to the Western kind of American culture of there is no tolerance for grief. It is something that we need to get over very quickly
Mhm.
compared to my cultural background. I'm of Indian origin, and there's a decent amount. I learned actually a lot growing up about how much tolerance there is for mourning after very specific losses.
Mm.
And in that time, you have all the leeway to feel all the things, to experience. You have tremendous support.
Mhm.
but there's an endpoint. And after that, it's okay.
Business
It
as
is time to
usual.
move on. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's time to move on. And I really do believe that I think that's a combination of societally, maybe even from many generations ago, there just wasn't, we didn't have the time, we didn't have the resources because we needed to focus on taking care of our families.
Mm.
And so perhaps that's where it came from, that we're going to allow for a certain amount of time to honor the loss. And then we have to put a cap on it because we have to practically get back to life to take care of our communities. And I think what that might have done is translated to now a more, in our more modern society, where we generally speaking are in decent shape to be able to take care of our families, hopefully so, right? Not maybe in the
Mm.
ways that we always want to, but we have more resources than we did multiple generations ago. And we've maintained that sense of there's a cap. But what we've also done is kind of disembodied ourselves from the experience so that we've cut short the time that's allowable.
Mm.
We try to speed through it. And in the process, we don't actually learn how to tolerate grief in order to give ourselves enough time and space to actually experience it. So I think
Mm.
that's how I'm sure that's not the only explanation, but I think that there's an element of that that puts an internal clock in all of our heads to go, is it too long now? Do I need to stop talking about this?
It's it's so true, right? Like we tend to rush through everything that doesn't make us feel good, which hello, of course. I mean, I got many speeding tickets for going through sticky and shitty emotions too fast. But it also almost feels like we have not really a concept of closure anymore, right?
Yeah.
We have, I don't know, sometimes you see this Pinterest inspirational quotes of like, oh, like your losses are like scars and they never fade away. You like your wounds are like scars, you will never see the scars, something like that. And it's
Yeah.
beautiful in a sense of yes, like this has shaped me and it will always be a part of me. And but with scars too, I mean, I have scars who still hurt.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean there is no hurt there.
Yeah.
So how can we find closure if they're still hurt?
Yeah. Yeah. You know what it's actually, I love that you brought that up because that was actually my graduate thesis was on
No
mourning
way.
practices.
Oh,
Yeah.
was it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. Oh.
Because I was very fascinated in that concept too of being the child of immigrants
Hmm.
born and raised in the United States and seeing the mourning practices that my parents participated in compared to what I was seeing happening here in the US with my US based friends. And I was fascinated, like, what does that do to our experience of grief and loss? And we know actually there's a lot of research that shows any kind of mourning practice, any kind of mourning ritual is so important in helping to integrate the loss
Mm.
into our life. And I use that word integrate very intentionally because we're not talking about you move on, you get over it. The
Mm.
pain sometimes is still there. But what
Mm.
we mean by that, and I bring this into my work with my private clients all the time, is how can we bring that loss into your day to day to honor. So I work, with people who experience pregnancy losses or infant losses, neonatal losses. So they've lost their children. And so
Mhm.
we go, how do we integrate that child or those children into your day to day in a way that
Mhm.
feels whole and supportive to you? Now, we
Mhm.
always wish that that child was here running around and doing all the things and being here and
Of
you get to
course.
raise them. That's not the case, but how else, given that that's not the case, how can we integrate them in? And that ritual can be something so simple. It does not have to be complicated. There are clients I have had where they chose not to have a funeral for their child. That's fine. There are other
Whatever
clients who
supports
have.
you, right? It's about
Right.
you. It's not about whatever expects you to
Exactly.
do. Mm.
Exactly. I have had clients who are very religious and they followed those tenets, and I have clients who are not religious and they've created their own traditions. But the common thread between all of them is how do we integrate it? Not how do we have a moment in time where we memorialize and then we move on, but much more about what is going to help you
Mm.
integrate that person into the day-to-day for you.
Okay, this feels ep epic moment. We have to, I feel we have to go deeper into this. The differentiation between ugh, now I have a brain fart. The of memorialization. No. I feel now my English is leaving me. It memorialization? No, that's not the word. What
Memorializing?
memorializing? Oh,
Yeah.
like everyone, please excuse me. English is not my native language. Anyway, memorializing and just like the grave difference between that and having like a shrine or a monument as a sort of like a testament, like a frozen piece in time
Mhm.
to compare to really having an integrated practice. Can you tell us more about that? Like also how this does look for like some of your clients so we get an
Yeah.
idea of that because I feel this is really big.
Absolutely. So I'll just give some examples
Mm-hmm.
from over the years. Like I've had clients where they have taken photos of their children and they have those photos right next to all the other family photos. And that's a really great way to memorialize and to have them kind of be part of, say, a visual of the family. I've had
Mm-hmm.
clients where they've done the same thing. They've taken pictures or maybe footprints or handprints of their children and they put them on the Christmas tree along with their living children. Um, there are other clients where they had, like I said, a full memorial with a
Mm-hmm.
funeral and the event, and there was a whole big day that was very important to them where their family came and they really participated. Even for children for parents who lost their children early in pregnancy and it's not quote unquote typically seen, but it was something that was very important to them to have a
Mm-hmm.
memorial to talk about this child that they were never going to be able to raise. Those are some examples of memorializing. There's so many different ways you can do that.
Mm.
The integration piece is much more day to day, and that's not to say it's either or. With my private clients, we find a way to do both. If memorializing is important, then we find a way to also integrate. And if memorializing is not important to them, then we still find a way to integrate. Integration, I think, is most important and helpful in that you create a ritual in your day to day to include them. Just like we have rituals with the people that we are sharing our life with, right? We say good morning to each other, we say good night to each other, we might call them, we might text them, we might hug them. We have already created rituals with the people already in our life. So, how can we do
Mm.
that with the people we don't get to share our life with anymore? So, I've had clients, every morning they will say good morning to their partner, their living children, and to their children that they
Yeah.
don't get to raise anymore. Some of them will, look up into the sky. Some of them will look at a picture. Some of them will just close their eyes and kind of feel the presence of those children. Rituals around holidays, right? I've had clients where they said, it's really important to me that we create a place at the children's table to say, hey, this child was supposed to be here, and we're
Mm-hmm.
going to remember him or her by having the space there. And you can imagine there's a lot of very difficult conversations that have to happen with family members who are very uncomfortable with that. But for the client, for
Yes.
those parents,
Mm.
that was really important. So they include them in that. I've had clients where they leave a space at the table, their dinner table every night, and there's just that's a space. It's whether it's set or not set, that's up to them. Good
Mm.
night practices at the end of the day,
That's so
birthdays,
beautiful. Mm-hmm.
rituals at that point. What do you want to say? What are there songs you want to sing that you sing every day, and then that's your connection to that person. So there's a lot of very simple ways that you can include them in the
Mm-hmm.
process of getting through your day to day.
And in your experiences, does tremendously support them and their grieving journey.
So much,
Mm.
because I think a lot of that pain that you were talking about of the scar, for at least a lot of my clients, we've identified that much of that pain is from wanting to remember that child and feeling like they're not allowed to.
Oh, this is so sad. But
Yeah,
I totally get it, right? Because it ties back into what's the socially acceptable limit of
right,
grief. Am I still
right.
allowed to grieve I don't know, giving up that one dream I had when I was in my 20s, and now I'm early 40s, and I'm like, wait, you're still grieving? Like it's yeah, we really got to stop with that. Like that's
Yeah,
annoying. Like there's no other word.
agreed.
How I feel when we talk about loss and grief, we we have to mention not just because she has both our roots. She's a Swiss American, or she was a Swiss American psychiatrist, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who
Yeah.
had I think it was her book was called On Death and Dying. Not
Yes.
sure. The 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
Yes.
Do you feel that's still a valid model that you like consciously or unconsciously walk your clients through?
So I think what's interesting about that model is that it was never meant for the grievers. That model was
Oh,
meant for those who are
or
dying.
those are like actually preparing for death. Oh,
Yes.
interesting. Okay, so
And
I'm corrupting the model here. Oh, excuse me. Interesting. Oh.
yeah, so it's not a model that I typically work with, although, we have clients obviously who are familiar with it, so they bring that to the table and they go,
Mm-hmm.
"Where do you think I am?" And, because my work is somatic in nature, we really try to dive into, well, what's your body doing at this point? And we
Mm.
try to find different patterns that maybe don't necessarily map with her stages of grief
Yeah.
and how she's laid them out, but more of what are your patterns and how do they show up? Because we start to see
Mm.
by different points of the year, different times of day, usually triggered by some kind of somatic memory or sensory memory.
Mm.
We usually start to see those kinds of patterns. And those are the ones that I think are far more interesting to me because they tell the story of what
Agreed. Yeah.
happened and what needs to be addressed still.
How how can those like somatic experiences, memories look like? I feel anyone who's now listening in is kind of like, oh, like maybe it's just me. I like to kind of like I really like this like the stages of like, oh, now I'm getting
Yeah.
closer to which is again there's no really like not an end. What how does grief manifest in the body?
Yeah. It can look of 100 different ways. And I think if anybody, you probably might hear other people saying, well, it's going to be in this very specific part of your body. And it's going to feel this one specific way. I would definitely caution anyone listening to rely on that as the one and only truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happens with our bodies is we all metabolize everything differently, from food to emotions to experiences.
Mm-hmm.
If I eat something and you eat something, our bodies are going to do different things with it, right? Same thing with loss.
Mm-hmm.
The experience of the loss is tied not only to the loss itself. So this is now a dream, a hope, a person I don't have or don't have anymore. But it's also what was my body doing at the time of the loss? And that's going to impact how we experience it too. So, truthfully, in my work with clients, I see it presenting a lot as chronic pain. I see it presenting a
Oh,
lot.
interesting.
Yeah,
Mm.
a lot of chronic pain, chronic achiness, shoulders hunched over, headaches, insomnia. That's how I see it presented. Now, that's of course not the only way that it's presented. And when we dive deeper with clients, we start to make connections. But it shows up in these ways because of what our body is doing to try to metabolize the grief. And if we cannot metabolize the grief because it's tied to traumatic stress, then it's going to stay stuck and it's going to show up in physical symptoms. Grief,
Mm.
I like to tell my clients, like, grief is not supposed to feel good, right? That sounds so obvious when I say it. But we tend to have this expectation because of the pressure around us to like, don't be too big about this and
Mm-hmm.
maybe tone it down a little and maybe
Oh,
speed
I
a
love to tone it
little.
down a little.
Right? We have a lot of pressure, spoken and unspoken, from people around us. And so we tend to think that if it's a really big, awful experience,
Mhm.
there's something wrong with us. And that is not necessarily the case. Uh, I like to think of grief as it comes in waves.
Mhm,
And the initial acute phase, and there's no time that we can put to that, it's going to be tsunami level waves coming very, very fast.
mhm,
And eventually, the intensity of the waves and the frequency of the waves do slow down if your body can metabolize the grief on its own. If it's not tied to traumatic stress, it takes expressing and having support and having the witness to be there with you in it that will speed up that process, if you
mm,
will. But it's really important to remember that just because it feels bad doesn't mean it's wrong. And I especially say that for listeners who are thinking about someone else in their life who they're concerned about, because I get a lot
mhm.
of referrals from concerned family members going, XYZ person had a miscarriage, XYZ person had a stillbirth. They're really struggling. And I go, my first question to them is, are they really struggling? Because I know it doesn't feel good. I understand that.
Mhm.
But are they struggling to the point where they need help? Or are they struggling to the point where they just need you to witness them without trying to rush them along?
Again, we're going back to we have a non-culture of like grief and closure, right? Because we don't, we even don't want to feel grief by proxy.
Right.
So we're like, okay, I'm shuffling him off to a specialist so I can feel better about myself
Like
because I've
I
done
did some.
something.
Exactly.
Mm.
Exactly. And it's a very, I know it comes from a good place. I know they're trying to help.
Yes, 100%.
And I think it's a really wonderful opportunity to think about what about this is making me uncomfortable watching my loved one so devastated,
Mhm.
right? Where can I then also increase what we call my somatic capacity to experience the loss or the grief with them so that I can support them in the way that they need?
Oh, okay. This is now we're gonna do a deep dive here again because I feel this is really universally helpful, right? Especially in this moment in time we're in, because we have so much global, accumulated global grief at the moment.
Yeah.
It's really hard to turn on the news and listen to them. And I
Hmm.
don't believe that just tuning out of listening to the news is a solution. Not for me anyway. I feel still want to feel detached to the world. But how can we raise our somatic capacity for grief?
Yeah. Somatic, so growing somatic capacity is similar to, say, losing weight, right?
Mhm.
That a lot of people will say, well, how do I tone my abs? How do I tone my arms or something like that? And it's like, well, you can't spot treat.
No.
And that's the same thing with somatic capacity is we can't spot treat. We can't just say, well, I'm going to grow my somatic capacity for grief, but I will not do it for anger or joy, right? So what we
Oh. Mm.
yeah.
Yeah.
So what we really need to do is just grow somatic capacity in general. And the way that we do that is we have to learn first, we have to learn how to experience our internal sensations first. And that usually, when I start with that with my clients, is when they initially recognize how disembodied we really are. That we think that we can feel things, and we can feel some things, but we are so cut off globally from so many of our basic sensations. And I'll just give you an example I see all the time. How often do we sit here in front of our computers and we're working? We have to go to the bathroom. We know we have to go to the bathroom. We know it's coming. And we wait and we wait and we push until we just cannot wait any longer. And now we are distended and we got to run. We go, "Ah, hold on, don't say anything. I got to run. I'll be right back."
Mhm.
The signs were there like 2 hours ago. Same thing with hunger, where we're doing something, stomach starts grumbling. You notice you're hungry, and we push and we push and we push
They
and we
start
push.
snapping at people.
Right, exactly. Comes out everywhere. Hangry land comes,
Oh, Hangryland, yes.
right?
My
And
toddler has Hangryland, but finest. Like it's insane. Oh. But sometimes, well, I
yes,
mean, we're to blame because we should recognize the signs sooner. But hey, sometimes.
no, I get it, but that's exactly it, right? Is we
Mm,
ignore signs. And if we can't listen to our basic fundamental needs, it is going to be extremely difficult for us to be present for our more complex needs for ourselves and for our community.
Why do you think we're now at this time? I feel a lot of people relate to that. And I mean, I'm sometimes might brush it off on like neurodiversity, but it's
Sure,
surely,
sure.
surely a case that we have a hard time identifying needs and emotions.
Yeah.
I know for my part, I was never really modeled emotions as a kid.
Yes. Yes.
Like we didn't talk about emotions. I
Right.
didn't know why I was feeling shitty, if it's because I'm hungry or I am tired or I'm actually
Right.
angry or resentful. Like I
Right.
kind of had to figure it out on my own, which was a fun 30s. So how can we how did we get there, and how can we sort of course correct, and for ourselves and also for the children we're raising?
Yeah. I think we got here systemically. I don't think it's
Mm,
an individual thing. You
agreed.
know,
Yeah.
I think
Or both for sure, because it's
right,
always
right. And I think a lot of the roots can be drawn to the fact that our medical system, which then translated into our mental health system, which is because it's all built in the same way, started to differentiate between mind and body many, many hundreds of years
oh,
ago.
mhm.
And they say there's a mind and body connection. I realize that the irony of that because that is part of my subtitle of my book, but that's
Yeah.
for SEO and
Oh,
search
I know we
reasons.
do things for SEO. Like, please don't hate us. We're all doing things for
Exactly.
SEO. Hmm.
But many hundreds of years ago, that was started to be separated, that there's a body and then there's a mind.
Mm.
And that's kind of from there is how the mental health field and psychology started is if I have something going on with me neck down, I'm going to see my doctor. And if I have something going on with me that seems like it's a mind thing, I'm going to see my psychologist, my psychiatrist.
God
And I
forbid it's
think
both.
exactly, I think
Mm.
that's what happened is I think that then translated to a change in how we do research and understand the human body, separating out understanding mental health versus physical health. Everything is separate not too long ago, we now finally have a field that I'm a part of called psychoneuroimmunology that's finally going, there's this thing
Hello. Like
called connection.
like they're actually like physically
It's
connected.
the same. We are not floating heads and walking bodies.
Would be
And but
fun though,
it's
but no.
it's some days, yeah, it would be kind of nice. But I think it's a very new field, right? It's pushing up against a system
Mm.
that is very well rooted in this idea of mind and body separation. And I think when the medical field started with that, it trickled into culture. And so you see a lot of Western culture. This concept was created in Western culture. So you see a lot of Western culture embody that in society. And, we start to have not only different kinds of jobs, but we start to talk about it differently. And then
Mm.
there's a stigma around it, right? That, oh, I have a
Yes.
broken arm, but I will not tell you about my anxiety, that kind of a thing. And you do see a difference, right? I feel like this is where I feel very lucky to be bicultural in that way, even though I grew up in the United States, just staying very closely connected to the Indian culture, where there are cultures that are less or are slower to pick up the Western trends. And you can see the shift that's happening that in Eastern cultures, if you will, to speak in shorthand, that disconnect does not exist. And
Mhm.
as those countries and cultures are becoming more westernized, you start to see the language change again. And so I do think that there's kind of this overarching kind of waterfall effect that then translates to I grew up in a family that didn't talk about feelings. And now what do I do about it? Because I would like to change that for my child. I used to work as a child therapist back in the day, 150 years ago. And I would always say child therapy is family therapy. And child therapy really is parent therapy first.
Yeah.
If we want to teach our children how to identify their feelings, we have to be able to do it at the drop of a hat for ourselves first.
Mm.
because it's not a lesson we have to teach our children. If we do it for ourselves, they'll learn it by watching.
Yeah, that's exactly. You don't teach children by telling them, but by showing them.
Yeah.
And you cannot show if you cannot apply.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And I think
which is
sometimes parents feel a little like, oh my God, I got to get it right and perfect. And I think, no, actually, there's a lot of learning that happens in the imperfection.
mm,
I can blow up in frustration because something pushed my buttons, and my kids might see that. And then it is in the repair and the recovery from that is when the learning happens. I can talk about, oh, this thing frustrated me. I could feel it. I could feel my jaw tensing up. I could feel my fists going like this. And I just wanted to yell really loud. And then I did yell really loud. That must have been really scary to hear.
yeah,
It was scary to feel. And look at what they've learned already with just those 2 sentences.
yeah. It's really the the skill parent a lot of parents need to develop is to really be humble and be like, yeah, mommy fucked this up bad. But
Yeah.
now we're gonna see what we're gonna do with that and how we're gonna
Right.
put the pieces back together.
Exactly. That is an
Mm,
invaluable skill for children to learn because you know that they're going to do the same as they grow up. There will be mistakes. They will make mistakes. They will cross lines. They will do things that they regret. That's a given. And it's
mm,
far more interesting and far more helpful, I think, for them to learn, what do I do on the other side? How do I
yeah.
fix that? How do I help? How do I ask for help? Right? Gosh, how many
Oh,
of us
that's
grew up?
another podcast episode. To ask and receive help. Ooh. I I want to circle back to something you said earlier because I feel this will also really support people in their individual grieving journeys. We've established that you have to do in your grieving journey what feels good to you and what supports you. And yet, we all have these people in our lives who are like, I don't know, maybe it's your mother-in-law. I hope it's not your partner.
Yeah.
Um, who are like, or it's your boss, or it's your work. It's who are just like, hey, just get on. Like, how? What is your advice on handling those sticky situations? For example, when you have to explain why there is like a set plate on the
Mhm.
Christmas dinner table.
Yeah. I think I think it involves first starting with being very honest with yourself about how important that is to you. Because again, I think we
Explaining
tend
yourself or
or
important.
needing or wanting that,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Okay.
The table, the place at the dinner table, the picture on the wall, the whatever it is
Yes.
that you're asking for from others. How important is that to you? Is it a non-negotiable? Is it something that would feel bad if they said no and you went along with it, but you could? Does it not matter? Like, I think it's really important to be honest with that
Pick
because
your
I think,
battle.
yeah, because sometimes it is non-negotiable. I have had clients where they said, you know what, this is worth the family fight because it is that important to me.
Mhm.
Great. Then that's a different conversation versus, are you doing this because you want acknowledgement from somebody that this child existed? Because then it doesn't have to be a place at the table.
No, there
That
are
can
other
be a
ways
different
to be feel
conversation.
seen and heard.
Exactly. And I think if you can differentiate the two, then it's a lot easier to figure out, is this a fight that's worth it? Sometimes the answer is yes. And sometimes it's, oh, I guess I just wish they would say their name more. I wish we could talk about them more. I wish I could tell them that, hey, their birthday's coming or the loss anniversary is coming and I just want a hug from my mom, you know? And you can identify that, then you can ask for what you want. But if we go down the path of, yeah, no, this is it and the fight is worth it, then I think it's helpful to present it in a way that is non-negotiable to you, like you would anything else. And many
Mhm.
times I use the example of like food allergies, right? I've grown up with severe food allergies. It is a non-negotiable.
Same.
Yeah, you too?
Yeah, what is yours?
I'm allergic to all legumes and pulses.
Oh, yeah. I can
Makes
raise
it
you
hard
a,
being
I
Indian.
can, and that's very true. That's like the silliest culture because your like Indian food is very good for mine. My food
Really?
intolerance, yes, I have celiacs.
Oh, yes.
And I'm like, give me the lentils.
I have a very
Give me the
good
chickpea.
friend.
I'm good with everything.
Exactly. Yes, I have a very good friend here. We're like, I guess we're never going to be able to eat together because she's the same way. That's what
Yeah.
she needs to eat too.
But
But
yeah.
so then you know then like it is a non-negotiable. If you give me a chickpea, I will not eat it because it'll send me to the hospital, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, if this is what I want the picture on the wall, I want the Christmas tree ornament, I want the place setting at the table, something like that. Then how would you talk about food allergies in the same way or whatever else is non-negotiable
Yeah.
in your life? You talk about it from a place of, hey, this is important and this is why it's important. And all you can do is express that. How the other person receives it and whether they are comfortable or uncomfortable with it is not on you. Your
Mm.
job is not to make people comfortable. Your job is to ask for what is important to you.
I'm gonna stitch this on my pillow. Because the amount of times, I mean, okay, I must say, in all fairness, my celiac diagnosis is not that long ago, so I still sometimes feel like bad for like when we're at the restaurant of like, could you like just please make sure and like how like and like is there really like no gluten
Yeah,
in a very polite and considerate way. It's really interesting how how it's not our job. Thank
it's
you
not
for
our job.
mentioning that. It's not our job.
Yes. No. And it takes practice, right? So this
Mhm.
is the other thing. It's going to feel awful and uncomfortable and terrible the first time and maybe the fifth time.
Mm.
But if it's that important to you, which is why it's so important to start with being honest with yourself, if it is that important to you, then you just practice over and over and over and over.
Mhm.
And you practice it in the way that feels best to you, right? There's no script that I can give that say, hey, say it this way, because who you are and who you're talking to is going to affect how you say it, right?
Yes.
So say it the way you've always said it. You're not a bad person. You've had hard conversations before. This is just one more.
Mm.
And their discomfort is not yours. It's not your problem, and it's not your problem to solve.
Mm. Amen. And I feel it all goes back, and I think this is probably our last talking point of to our abysmal culture of dealing with grief, right? And this also, I mean, I still have moments. I still bring back my celiac example, but like I still have moments where I am invited to family gatherings, but
Yes.
there's literally no food for me,
Yep.
and I'm like, cool. There were also moments, gatherings where I'm like, okay, I'm going because I feel unwanted here.
Yeah.
Um, so and this is very much, and it slowly starts shifting. I mean, we know big cultural changes last take generations, but how can we contribute to um, a better culture of grief?
I love that question. I love that because yeah, I love it. I think doing our own work individually to
Mm.
grow our own capacity for grief is infectious.
Mhm.
There's no way that it doesn't affect the people around us positively, those immediately around us, but then also the larger community that we're a part of. And now, because everything is digital, that community can cross oceans just like we're doing right now.
Mhm.
I think it sounds as trite as it sounds. I think building our own somatic capacity for grief is critical because it'll allow us then to ask for what we need more effectively, more frequently, more confidently. but it'll also allow us to ask different questions for those that are mourning their losses in our lives,
Mhm.
right? We are going to be less uncomfortable saying that child's name or saying that person's name, or we will be able to sit in silence longer as they're telling us about the hopes, the dreams that they have lost, the health that they have lost, and we won't feel the pull to try to fix it for them,
Mm.
right? I think if we want to see a cultural shift, I think it's got to start with us first. And then I think the question that's always got to be in our minds, and I do this for myself too, is what about this is making me uncomfortable? And how can I get more comfortable with that? Because if it's their loss and I'm uncomfortable, imagine how uncomfortable they are because
Mhm.
their heart is shattered. So, how can I increase my comfort level in sitting with this, in being with these people? And I do that for somebody else, they will ultimately be able to go, oh, that felt great. I'm going to take that and say that or do that for the other
Yeah, and
person.
just reciprocate in any sort of way.
Exactly. Yes.
Mm.
Yes, exactly. I think it's a powerful approach and it won't take long. I think you'll see the effects of it quite quickly if we can all commit to it.
Oh, 100%. I mean, those things really can speed up at overnight almost, right? Once it's kind of like
Yes.
caught fire.
Yes.
It's I feel like we also have to talk about because it's so tightly together, right? With raising our own somatic capacity for grief is empathy.
Yes.
And I, funnily enough, I'm gonna link it in the show notes. I just last week I wrote a piece on empathy as a catalyst for social change, right? How we can start feeling more empathic is really goes into broader structural changes as well. And this is also something we've lost along the way to be
Yeah.
empathic and be
Yeah.
like, yes. It's almost again we're going full circle back to your first conversation, right? We compare each other to like our griefs to each other, like as if my grief, like her grief would take away something from my grief. Like
Yeah.
I don't know, late stage capitalism, I fucking hate it here. Like, I don't know. I always blame anything on capitalism that goes wrong. But hey,
Well, you know what? You're not wrong.
where's
You're
smoke,
not
there's
wrong.
fire.
Yes.
But it's really how, like, what's your take on empathy, right? Like how tightly it is tied together with raising our somatic capacity for grief and seeing
100%.
what others need.
Yeah. I think it's very closely connected. I mean, that example I gave earlier about getting referrals from loved ones, if I just need, maybe can you help her
Yeah.
out? Can you help her out? Right. I think a lot of that is not necessarily that they're not empathic people. I think it's that their empathy is allowing them to feel a tiny smidge of how bad it feels to be mourning a loss. And because they don't have the somatic capacity, they don't know what else to do other than to make a referral to a specialist. If we had bigger somatic capacity, we could sit with that empathy longer. Because what grief needs the most out of everything else, and assuming it's not tied to traumatic stress, what grief needs primarily, first and foremost, is a witness. And that witness can be anybody. And that witness, when empathic, can be tremendously healing.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I remember back to, I mean, all the big and also like the looking back less significant events, maybe when I was a kid, like all those times. I mean, I lost so many things. I lost so many toys as a kid. Like, I probably now I'm like, dear Lord, why did my parents ever give me anything? Um, but I remember I once lost one of my favorite plushies, and I was so heartbroken. I was devastated, and it wasn't really like my parents' basic reaction was like, "Oh, you lose things all the time." things, I guess. I don't know how this is helping me. I felt so unseen,
Yes. Yes.
right? Imagine if, I don't know, if my mom or dad would have sat me down and be like, "Oh, this is really a terrible loss." Just acknowledging,
Yeah.
yes, and witnessing, man, game changer.
Right? Exactly. Exactly.
Mm. And I'm probably gonna have to add another chapter on the article I wrote on empathy and as a catalyst for social change. And really, yes, because it's really true. People feel then like the little nudges of empathy, but they can't hold it. They don't know what to do with it. They're like
Yeah.
trying to scratch it out. And it's really interesting point of view that you raised of we have to raise our somatic capacity to hold it. It's really interesting. I have to think about this and then probably add another uh, chapter to the article. How we really, yeah, need to be able to sit with things. Um, and I think this is also like a really great way to. I feel we've came full circle with our conversation. Parijat, thank you so much for going on this unpleasantly pleasant journey on talking about grief and loss and heartbreak, and that you spun it in a way that leaves us hopeful. And I really wish that anyone who's tuned in today is also feeling hopeful, because I feel it was really an empowering, inspiring conversation.
So glad. Thank you for the invitation to be on this journey with you.
So, for anyone who wants to get to know more of you, who wants to connect with you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, the best place is on the website, ruvelle.com. And from there, we have links to our shop, our products, our services, our social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Threads. I don't know where everybody
You
is.
name it, you're
We're
there.
there. But all the links are
Good.
from the website. That would be the best place to come.
Perfect. We're going to link everything in the show notes. And I always have one last clash question before I let you go.
Yeah.
What book are you currently reading, or what audiobook you're currently listening to?
Ooh. Ooh. I am currently reading White Nights by Anne
Oh,
Cleeves. I am a huge British crime drama fan. And the show Shetland, I saw that first and I loved it.
yeah.
Have you seen
I
it?
no, I haven't. It's on my watch list. I
Yes.
as soon as I'm done with the second season of Unprisoned,
Uh,
you know, you know,
I have
Unprisoned.
not seen that one, but I know I've heard of it. Yes.
Watch it.
Yeah.
If you're into mindset, psychology, all those sort of things, it's such a good show. Love it.
Nice.
It's
Excellent.
on Shetland is up next.
Shetland is excellent. It is so well done. And it's actually different than the books, which are also exceptionally well done. So White Knights is the second of the series. And I'm
Oh,
just savoring
okay.
that book. I'm like reading it so slowly because I just want to savor the experience of it.
Oh, that's cool. I did not know it was a book series.
Yeah.
Wow. Which part in the UK is it set? Like the Shetland Islands? Like really?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Hmm.
Oh, and then speak of like British crime now, like when you said British crime, I'm like already. Oh yes. I can always mention like, have you read any of Ian Rankin's books?
I have not. No, I just finished Val McDermid's series. So
Oh yeah,
Anne Cleeves is second.
yeah. I mean, if you or anyone listening in wants to start Ian Ranking's Inspector Rebus series, the good thing, be warned, there are like by now almost like 20 books in the series, which is good and not good. It's good because you always know what to read next. Bad because it's going to take you forever. But it's so good, and it's the novels are all set in Edinburgh in Scotland.
Oh,
So
nice. Okay,
mhm,
I've got it on my list. I love
mhm.
it.
Yeah, I was even like full out nerd when I first time I was in Edinburgh. I was like, oh, I got to go see that pub where he
Yes.
always
Yes.
goes for like a nightcap, and the pub actually exists.
That is awesome. I would totally do the same.
Yeah, I'm like, my friend was like, sure, we can go have a drink there or any other pub. It's fine. I'm like, nah, it's gotta be that one.
That one.
Okay, so the reason I ask, those regulars know where I'm gonna link all the books mentioned and the Scenic Route Book Club webpage. So whenever you're like, dang, what do I read next? Go have a look there. And yes, crime series, Shetland and John Rebus, highly recommended, but be warned, you're gonna be reading forever. So, Parijat, thank you so much for being on the Scenic Route with me.
Thank you, Jennifer. This is lovely.